It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Today, on That One Time, I'm joined by my therapist, Matt Defina. I've been working with Matt for around 6 months now using the internal family systems framework, and in that short time together, it has had more impact than 5 years of conventional therapy.
Every time I did the work, it worked. And every time I introduced someone to the work, it worked for them too.
The interesting thing about working with you, and specifically working with IFS, is I can't get away with that bullshit.
It's almost like this funny feeling of hitting rock bottom. You're like, surely this is it. Surely this is the bottom, because if this is the bottom, at least it's on the up from here.
On that note, I'd love to potentially do an actual session with you. So
let's just start by slowing down. As you're slowing down, can you just tell me just an emotion or a feeling that you've been experiencing the last couple of days or last week?
You know, the feeling of anxiety in my stomach is kind of a stabbing, needly feeling, like a low, annoying, stabbing, needly feeling.
Hello, everybody.
No. 5 minutes. Bloody hell. Doesn't take long. It should just unravel into chaos. Internal family systems is life-changing, and because of this, I wanted to approach this episode a little bit different. So we're going to be exploring the technique as well as doing a live therapy session so you can see how it works firsthand. Matthew is the founder of Another Way, a company helping purpose-driven professionals create a meaningful life and career without burning out. And I'm a massive proponent of his work and the IFS technique. So I think that if you're open to therapy and haven't heard of internal family systems, this episode could have an incredible impact on your life. So it seemed important to be vulnerable and open with Matt to truly explore it in a genuine way, which was very challenging, but I think well worth it. So I really think you'll enjoy this episode with Matthew Defina. And if you like this episode, please give us a rating, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, etc., as we are on a journey to 1,000 subscribers and every little bit helps. Welcome to That One Time with Adam Metwally. This week's episode is with Matt Defina, my therapist. So on that note, if you could give an elevator pitch of who you are, what you do, and how you're going to contribute to the world, what does that sound like?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an organisational psychologist. I've spent many years researching burnout, engagement, psychological safety, adaptive leadership, gender stereotypes. I went into a corporate career in corporate change management, leadership development, and consulting. And after just 6 months at PwC, one of the big four, I resigned and spent the next 5 years working for a charity called the Man Cave. And we basically created rites of passage programs for teenage boys to equip them with the skills, tools, resources, and role models to become healthy young men. And I left that just start of last year to create Another Way. Basically, inspired by my own journey, I went through a series of panic attacks about 18 months ago. I went through severe burnout. It caught me completely off guard, especially because I was working in the mental health space as well. And part of what I do now, and the intention with the impact of the work I'm doing, is really to help people heal their relationships with their bodies, with their minds, and with themselves, and to stop abandoning themselves and start really truly listening to themselves. And yeah, we've already spoken about IFS. There's a number of other modalities that I use through Another Way. But when I come back to the core of it, it's actually just unlocking the innate intelligence within people and helping them trust themselves again. That's what it comes back to, really. And Another Way. My intention is to create experiences, communities, and resources to help people unlock themselves and unlock their true potential.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you can get as many people unlocked into their purpose and potential as possible, it's much better for the world as a whole.
I genuinely believe everyone has a unique reason for being here. And the main goal that we have to do in our own work, but also with the support of others, is to find out why, or to at least create that why. And I think, like you said, if we can do that and we can help people unlock their unique spirit and contribute to community in a meaningful way, then a lot of the mental health challenges that we're seeing and other different modern health challenges we're seeing will start to fix themselves without making too much of a broad sweeping statement.
Okay, so on that note, the people that generally go into health and health services and mindset and personal development spaces, they have a very coloured and interesting childhood, with some pivotal moments and experiences that lead to generally exploring different ways of approaching the world, which then lead down certain pathways. So with that in mind, what's the context of your early years that allow us to kind of understand you as a human and why this is so important to you?
Yeah, I love the framing of that. And I feel like one of the reasons a lot of people end up in this work is because they're looking for answers for, why they are who they are. And that's very much where my journey with it started. I was born in Melbourne, Australia, and I basically grew up going between my mum's and my dad's home because they split when I was 1 year old. So I spent half of my year with my dad, who was in the army for 50 years, a scuba diving instructor, outdoor ed teacher. And then I spent the other half of the year with my mum, who was a clinical psychologist, a leadership development coach, culture coach.
Oh, damn. That's two extremes.
Two extremes. And I went like a week at my mum's, week at my dad's, week at my mum. And they were amazing parents. I'm so grateful for all the opportunities they provided for me. But I think, naturally one of the identities that formed for me at a young age was, why'd my parents break up? Is there something wrong with me? And when you're a kid, you don't really understand that there's way more going on in the world than what it all revolves around you. That's just part of being a child. And so, unfortunately, I think I internalized the belief system, this must be something wrong with me. That's why mum and dad broke up. Now, I'm 33 now. I've got a really beautiful relationship with both my parents. I've had many conversations about this, and they've reassured me that it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, you were the problem.
That'd be pretty harsh, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And so I think growing up, I had a real big mix of what I got to do. And my dad would take me scuba diving and skiing and on cricket trips, and my mum would let me go to art class instead of football. And I was really lucky. But then even when I went to school, and I went to a good school in Melbourne, and my parents worked really hard to send me to that school, I never felt like I fit in, to be honest. I was always loving doing drama and sport and cooking and baking and reading and writing and all the things. And I didn't meet many other guys. I went to an all-boys school. I didn't meet many other guys where I felt like it was okay to do that and also be a heterosexual male. So I was from an early age trying to work out, where do I fit in and who am I and why don't I feel like I'm the same as the guys I'm around? And that very much typified my 20s. I did a gap year to England for a year. I came back. I started studying psychology, philosophy. I became a DJ. I was a barista. I was trying to get children sponsored for World Vision. I was doing lots of different things, all even back then trying to find some answers. Why am I here? What am I doing here? And it all sort of built up to my 29th, 30th birthday. I was 29. It all kind of came crashing down. I had worked really hard to try and get myself into a position of getting engaged and going back into a corporate career to make more money and different things, and had an experience on a retreat of really waking up to truth of my life and feeling safe for the first time and not feeling like I was in survival mode. That was about 3 years ago. And once that moment happened, I realized it was time to do some even deeper work. And I've spent the last 3.5 years really seeking more truth, but finding some answers this time, which has been nice. And that's really what is backing what I do now.
So there's a lot in what you just said. And one thing that really stood out to me then was the retreat. So what happened?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, good question. And it's a funny one to talk about because I'm still coming to terms with it myself. Not so much the story, but sharing it itself. And I'll share it openly with you because I'm starting to share it more and more. But the retreat itself was designed as a rite of passage. It was designed as an experience to take us through a transformation. What it also allowed us to do was to responsibly and consciously engage with psychedelics, namely MDMA and ketamine. Now, up to that point, I had done a lot of drinking, but I'd never gone near drugs. I saw them as dangerous. I saw them as not okay, and I'd been quite resistant. But for whatever reason, I was, about to turn 30, and I thought, you know what, screw it. If there's any time, let's just do it now. And the support of both those medicines, which is how I like to think of them when they're used as medicine, meant that I felt safe for the first time in my body, and I felt like I actually loved myself and I loved the people around me, and I was able to actually be in the room for the first time. And so the next day after that experience of really waking up, I felt like $1,000,000. I've never felt so good in my life. And that's when the penny started to drop. And I had this, I almost describe it like it's like a thunderbolt of lightning just hit me from above. And it went, you need to follow your truth. And I remember that was the day that I committed to following my truth, no matter what. I was like, okay, in this lifetime, all I care about is finding the truth. What do I need to do? And then once I committed to that, the scary thing started to dawn on me. Well, how committed am I really? Because if I'm 100% committed to this, there might be some things I'm going to have to be willing to let go of. And I had to let go of a few things that were really special to me and quite shocking to the people around me as well. You know, I was with a partner at the time and realized that relationship wasn't aligned anymore. That was really hard to come back from a weekend retreat and to share that with her. And bloody confronting. Yeah, it was like that. And, you know, I ended up turning 30, living back at my mum's house. And, you know, it wasn't what I hoped for or expected. But I remember waking up and going, you know what? This is nowhere near what I hoped for or expected. But I feel like I'm heading in the right direction, even though I feel like I'm like not even at square one anymore. I'm like square negative 100 now.
Yeah. I resonate with what you've just said then, and going back to square negative 100, or, you know, we've spoken at length about the challenges that's been faced over the last couple of years, but I get that feeling that I don't know how we got here, but it kind of feels okay, and we'll see what happens next. So, yeah. And fast forward a few years, what happened next?
Yeah, well, I spent the next 3.5 years like really exploring every and any modality that I could get my hands on. I started doing internal family systems therapy. I did that with a group of men for a couple of years, and that was really powerful work. I sat with different medicines as well. I started doing Vedic meditation. I doubled down on my work as well. And like what I would say, the big shift was a shift towards a life of service. I remember service was the thing that really unlocked things for me when I was looking for answers. Love and service, unconditional love and service. And once I started feeling into that, then it was like, okay, well, if it's not about me and it's about service, then how do I make my whole life about service? And that's effectively what I spent the last 3.5 years working towards. Now, like that was the beginning of the end and the end of the beginning. Like that was like the turning point, but then there was heaps that came after. Another relationship that was really fruitful and transformational and expansive, but also really challenging, brought a lot of things to the surface that I hadn't realized I hadn't processed or worked through myself. You know, more travel, heading overseas, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, traveling with friends, burnout, panic attacks, all that was still to come. And, you know, moving back in with my family, moving houses multiple times. That's been like the last couple of years. And when, you know, it came around to the panic attacks, I was like, well, if I know this work that I've been doing, somatic work, listening to my body, listening to my gut, listening to my heart, the panic attacks are trying to tell me something's not right. And I started to talk to the panic. It's like, hey, panic, well, what's up? Like, what are you freaking out about while I'm having the panic attack? And the panic attack was like, well, what the fuck are we doing? Like, why are we still in this job? Or, you know, why are you not listening to us? And it got to the point where I went to Olympic Park in Melbourne and I delivered a keynote presentation to 300 medical students about preventative mental health and how to look after yourself in the hospital system. And I almost didn't make it to the presentation because I woke up that morning with a panic attack. I had to pull myself together to go deliver the presentation. And then afterwards collapsed in the car, shaking and crying and screaming. And I remember just thinking, like, so what's wrong with me? What am I missing? And that was probably the lowest point of the last couple of years. And that's when I it's almost like this funny feeling of hitting rock bottom. You're like, I mean, surely this is it. Surely this is the bottom, because if this is the bottom, at least it's on the up from here. And for me, thankfully, that felt like that actually was rock bottom when I started building back from there, but it's been a long road. So yeah, it's been a lot of shedding, a lot of losing people I loved, a lot of meeting new people that I've, you know, feel really lucky to have met. And yeah, it's been a bit of a wild ride, but I feel like the thread I've been following is just how do I realize my full potential in this lifetime, and what am I willing to sacrifice in order to get there? And I don't have the truth fully yet. I feel like I'm still creating it, but I'm way closer than I was a few years ago. I feel way more myself than I ever have.
Do you have any idea of when, like, how you'll feel when you're like, oh yeah, I think I got it now? Is there a point where you're like, all right, this is it?
That's a good one. I mean, this week in France has felt like that. Even this whole trip, I've been in the UK for a couple of weeks before this as well. And I think the feeling I've had, and I get this feeling through meditation, which is really nice. You know, doing that every day gives me that feeling of what it feels like to sort of hit the bottom and just be able to sit there. I feel like we sort of know intuitively. I mean, I've had moments where I'm just going, okay, my nervous system's calm. I feel good, feel aligned. I trust. I don't know how I'm going to get to where I'm going, but I know that I care about where I'm going, and I think I know where it is, and I'm just going to shoot my shot. I feel like we can honestly feel it in our body. And when we can feel a sense of inner peace and calm in our body because our parts aren't running amok, then our whole system relaxes and our whole nervous system starts to digest food better, recover better from runs in the gym. We start to be able to talk. People, I see it all the time. People's voices change, people's eyes change, people's faces change, how people hold themselves change when they access that sense of inner peace and calm. So I think it's as much of it might be a bit of a cop out as an answer. I think it really is an inner knowing. And I would say if you're listening and you go, well, I don't have an inner knowing, but I do have an inner agitation. The agitation is the clue to find out why you're not quite at the inner knowing of the inner peace yet. The agitation is a sign for me of someone being ready for transformation. So I'd follow those threads if you're trying to find a way.
The challenge I know a lot of people face is the externalization of that agitation and blaming the external world for the feelings of agitation that you're feeling, and a potential lack of ownership of that agitation. So with that in mind, what's a framework of thinking that you potentially had that was useful in potentially internalizing what was important to internalize about your agitation and understanding what was the world around you and changing your environment?
There was a phrase that was given to me that I'll share with you, which unlocked a lot for me. And it simply is, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And for me, that means, well, it's not your fault. I mean, what happened when you were a kid, or when you weren't right in the head and you made a choice, or you said something that wasn't right, or maybe it's not your fault that something happened around you, or maybe it is your fault. Whatever it is, all is forgiven. And now, from this point forward, it is your responsibility. And so all that really means is, if we erase all of the past and we allow ourselves to arrive in the present moment, what now? What are you choosing now? And the responsibility piece is the piece that I think was a big part of me feeling like I was free from the judgment and I guess I didn't want to let myself off the hook feeling. And more recently, it's been letting go of judgment of myself and doing that not just in a mental way, but also like I've been holding in my stomach for 10, 15 years. I don't know how long, probably since I was a teenager, and started to practice letting go at a deeper level. I was like, okay, well, I can feel there's some tension in my stomach, so I'm just going to let my stomach go and see what happens. All this judgment came up, all this shame, all this guilt, why don't you have a six pack or whatever else? And I was like, whoa, there's so much in this. And so I just started letting go of the judgment and the shame, because I've had the judgment and the shame for years and years and years. And the judgment and the shame just leads to more judgment and shame. So like, why would I keep going that way if I could let it go and help those parts of me let go and feel acknowledged by me? And then I can go another way. I can find another path, which is more healing. So I think that's been the other thing as well, is letting go and helping parts of me let go by feeling safe with me, to then allow us to step forwards. And I see it sometimes with clients and with friends as well. they'll just go in loops. And if they're going in a loop, it's usually because there's something unresolved within themselves or within their life or their part that makes them feel like they can't move forwards until this thing is acknowledged. And for many people, like, that's true. But there needs to come a point where you go, there's a line in the sand here. It's not my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault in many ways, but it is now my responsibility what I choose to do next. And when people embrace responsibility and choice, boom, the whole world is your oyster. Like, you can do anything from there. So I think that was the biggest thing that supported me to start, I guess, taking ownership and recognizing that that was going to be the best path forwards.
On your point about going in loops, I want to make a little side note. When we've done work together, I worked with therapists since probably 2018, and I find it just on a high level extremely valuable. It's an amazing tool that can help to solidify thinking, have a potentially unbiased third party that isn't your friend or isn't your family member that can just like bounce thought processes and kind of, if it's good, call you out and when it's appropriate to, but when you need just that support, like, be there and support. But I found, until working with you, until beginning to work on IFS, I found that I was able to pseudo heal through fooling. I don't know if it was fooling or maybe the therapist didn't really care. I can't really tell, but intellectualizing the reasons why things need to get worked on, but then not really having any breakthroughs or not really having any like punch in the face moments, except for one. There was one time in probably 3 years where I had a really big breakthrough. And that was when we did some CBT work prior to working with you, and it reframed the memory, and it was a whole thing, and I was bawling my eyes out in the car, and it's kind of wild. But every other time it was just like circles and circles and circles. The interesting thing about working with you, and specifically working with IFS, is I can't get away with that bullshit because, and we've done it before, the moment you as a practitioner sees me getting in my loops and getting in my head and kind of going around in a circle, it's a hard stop. And you've done it to me a number of times. You go, all right, hold on, stop, breathe. What are you feeling? And I think with men in general, that hard stop is where we stop. We don't actually have the skill sets to do the hard stop, get into what we're feeling. And in the process of getting into what we're feeling, and me specifically as well, it forces me to address the issue, because it's like you're feeling, and then the feelings bring up other emotions, and then the other emotions talk to you. And then in the process of those emotions talking to you, then you deal with whatever the fuck was the problem in the first place. So, we've only done maybe 6 sessions or something. I can't remember exactly, but those 6 sessions have been more impactful and harder than 3 years of just general therapy. So that was an interesting side note that I wanted to add into that. So moving on from that point, I'd love to talk to you about, what is internal family systems, or, shortened to IFS, and what makes it so important as a therapy technique for you and for the general world.
Awesome. Thanks, dude. Thanks for sharing that as well. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I love working with men, because you have these aha moments. You're like, oh man, I'm sick of this loop. How do I get out of it? IFS stands for Internal Family Systems Therapy, and effectively what it proposes is that within us we have all versions of us up until this point that have lived our life. So we have, our inner child, and all the different ages of our inner child. We have our inner teenager, we have our inner young man or young woman, and as you get older, you've got versions of you that exist as well. And we also have these parts of us, and these versions of you have their own parts and their own worlds. And so, say you're tired and you're hungry and you want a shower, it might not be you that's actually tired and hungry and wants a shower. It might be your inner 5-year-old who needs some love and support from you. And so what we can do, and the reason that I find IFS is so powerful, is because what we can start to do is we can go back and we can reparent ourselves at that age as if we were back then, and go back and be the parent that they didn't have in that moment, or at least even if they did have a great parent in that moment, maybe they have a perception that they were alone. And so when we go back and we reparent ourselves, we start to, I guess, provide the emotional needs for those parts of us and those young versions of ourselves in a way that no one else can. And the reason that this is such a powerful modality and is taking off, and has been taking off, it's been around for a few decades, but it's only really come into the mainstream culture in the last few years, is because it's a form of you being able to do self-therapy. You're effectively showing up unconditionally loving for these parts of you, and you're listening to them, and you're saying, hey, Mr. Judgment, I love you so much. Thank you for being here. What do you need? And he's like, well, you've never acknowledged me before. You've just tried to get rid of me by drinking alcohol every Friday night or whatever it is. And so we start to get to know these parts of us. And the best modern hack I can give you that explains IFS better than anyone is a big thank you to Pixar, because Inside Out 1, Inside Out 2 is internal
and
family.
2, I watched 2.
Yeah. Like, that's it. That's what it is. And, obviously there's more to it than just what is in the movie, but that's effectively what we're talking about, these parts of us that are in our inner world that are trying to look out for us and trying to support us.
Do you think they knew when they were making that movie that this is just a movie about internal family systems sponsored by the IFS Institute?
So I know you're semi-joking, but I need to go look this up because I'm still very much in that space. I haven't had time to read into it yet, but supposedly it's been a very intentional choice. I'm not sure whether it was what they set out for at the start of Inside Out, or whether it's it very much became much more a part of Inside Out 2. But there's some stories coming out now that this has very much been an intentional choice by them partnering up with another academic institute to start to, I guess, filter some of these practices into the mainstream, but obviously combining it with a compelling story as well. It's kind of similar. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched Sex Education on Netflix, which I love. They did research, Lynx went and did research from thousands of teenagers across the United Kingdom about the number one topics they wanted to learn about in sex education in school. And the whole premise of sex education on Netflix is to provide an alternative form of sex education to young people. And that's why every episode in sex education is themed around a different topic. So I feel like it's coming more into at least the mainstream movie Netflix, space. And there's a bit more going on behind the scenes that we realize. But regardless of whether that's true or not, I got to go check my facts. It's pretty epic.
I've never thought about it that way. It's an interesting way to bring in different cultures and different ideas into the mainstream through entertainment and storytelling. It makes you wonder what other stories have been imprinted into your brain in the past that maybe you've taken from movies and television shows that aren't helpful and supportive to you.
Totally. Yeah. And it also, I think what we're realizing more and more is how much of a responsibility different media houses have in what stories they choose to tell and how they choose to tell them. And I think one of the interesting trends I'm seeing with things like biopics is biopics are dramatized reality or dramatized documentaries. And people sometimes watch a biopic on, say, Queen or Amy Winehouse or, Downton Abbey or The Crown, I should say. And they assume that it's real, but it's not. And then the blurred lines between what Hollywood is producing, quote unquote Hollywood, and what is true is it's a whole other topic, obviously, but there's definitely, we need to be careful what we consume.
Yeah, it's you forget that sometimes, and you can get caught up in just entertainment and media and music and things that don't serve you positively and kind of program your brain in a way that is not helpful. It's a jungle out there.
Yeah, and I think
it's a jungle.
When I think about my diet, I'm not just thinking about food and drink. I'm thinking about what content am I consuming, what friends am I speaking to? What messages am I sending and receiving? You know, we're talking about, when we're talking about a human's, what they're consuming, we're talking about everything that's in their environment that impacts how they show up as a person. And so cultivating a healthy environment, you know, choices of media that you consume, choices of books that you read. There are multiple TV series. Breaking Bad was one where I started watching it and I was like, I feel a bit funny watching this. It doesn't leave me with a good feeling in my body. I'm not going to watch it. I don't care how popular it is. And I just didn't watch it. I don't really watch the news anymore. I have to find other ways to dial in, but there's so much news that I don't really want in my space that I just prefer not to watch it and rely on other friends and family to update me on things. So yeah, I think we have to really consciously choose what we consume. It impacts our whole system.
I'm much the same. I mean, I personally just love meth, so I love Breaking Bad, but I'm joking. That was a joke.
It's a worry. You have to clarify that. I'm just kidding.
I think that there was a slight delay on the audio, so I thought my joke didn't land. But moving on. The other point I was going to make was I have a similar thought process around the news, and what I've come to, the conclusion that I've come to is you are the product at the end of the day when it comes to news. You are the product of attention and eyeballs being sold to advertisers. So therefore, you're being programmed to spend the most amount of time on whatever platform, and this goes for social media as well, in most part. Your time and energy is being spent and programmed by, and thoughtfully programmed by these businesses to then sell that attention to the advertisers. So with that in mind, that most of the time it is not very valuable. It's not a very valuable use of your time, except for, and this is the one key caveat that I think is appropriate, when there is a crisis, like a genuine, specific, measurable, impactful to your life crisis in your relatively immediate time, space and time. And then the access to the news allows you to make better decisions in real time about your life and your family's life, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything else, if it's important enough, you will eventually find out about it by the world around you. So you can kind of shut off and then turn on when you are like, okay, prime example, recently there was a Trump thing, like the Trump shooting. Like that, in that time, like I spent the next 2 days on Twitter, basically going through as much as I could to understand what the hell happened, because there is a pathway where if it goes the wrong direction, America could turn into a battlefield pretty quickly. So I need to know what the heat check is on the country to make sure that I'm able to make better decisions. But now that I've kind of got a feel for what happened, outside of anything new, I don't need to look at it anymore. It's gone. But yeah, so that's it. That's the important. That's kind of the little framework that I put together. I don't know if that you potentially agree with it or you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah, no, I like it, and I think what it comes back to is a topic we were talking about earlier, which is that you have a choice what you choose to consume. Now, to your point, and I think two resources that have been really helpful for me in understanding this were Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, the book, and The Social Dilemma, the Netflix documentary. It was really scary to learn just how powerful these businesses are at getting our attention. And in the age of data and attention, people's attention is worth a lot of money. So I think one of the ways that we can reclaim some of our sovereignty, if you like, and if that's a weird phrase for you, don't worry about it. Basically, reclaim your power is start to make conscious choices around the media you choose to consume. It is a social norm in some cultures, at least, to watch the news every night. And eventually, after a few years ago, I just like, I'm tapping out of this one. I'm sorry, guys. This doesn't work for me. I'm not getting a good thing from this. So we can choose what we consume. And as you said, you can choose to tap in, and then you can also choose to tap out. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, for sure. So, going back to the specifics of IFS therapy, I want to get an understanding. What was the moment in time where you got introduced to it, on an individual basis as a potential modality for you to work through your stuff? And then what made you go, I'm going to actually get, accredited in this?
Yeah, so I did a course with a group of men, and the course was called The King's Experience. And it was only a few weeks after that retreat had happened, and I was living back at home, and I was on a really challenging period of time, to be honest. And over the course of 3 days, we were on Zoom for 3 days. Pretty sure it was lockdowns in Melbourne at that point, so it was all on Zoom. And we got introduced to this idea of internal family systems and developmental stages. I knew about developmental stages, but I'd never thought about it this way. And I still remember we had our first chance to do the work with our facilitator. And my facilitator just said, okay, close your eyes and let's go and see if we can find your little boy. And I remember my body started shaking straight away. And so many parts of me were just like, no, we don't need to go talk to your little boy. No, that's fine. Don't. And then before I knew it, I was sitting with my little boy in his sandpit in his backyard where he grew up. And I just looked at him. I had my eyes closed, but I looked at him internally, and I just felt so much sadness in my body. And I was like, whoa. And it was almost like I couldn't breathe. It was like, this is a lot. And I just asked him, how are you feeling? He's like, I feel really sad. And my facilitator was like, okay, great. We're not going to think our way through this. You're going to feel your way through this. So allow yourself to feel sadness. And that's all you're going to do for now. And that's what I did. And I remember I spent about the next half an hour just crying all these sadness with my little boy. And, eventually had more of a conversation with him and started to ask him, what do you need? I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get here. Really showing up for him in a way that I wasn't able to when I was younger. And after that point, after that weekend, I remember coming out of it with more clarity, more presence. I felt more grounded. I felt more loving. I felt more open. And things felt hopeful, not just because of the process I was going through, but also because of this practice. And every time I did the work, it worked. Every time I did the parts work, I felt better. I wasn't avoiding anything. I was going and, engaging with this part. I guess I felt more like a man as well. I was like, oh, I'm actually not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid of my emotions. I'm happy to go and talk to them. And so I did even deeper work then with that same group. And that was the very beginning. And then when we did the deeper work, that's when I went really deep. And we spent the next 3 to 6 months doing really intentional work. And like I said, every time I did the work, it worked. And every time I introduced someone to the work, it worked for them too. And eventually the evidence just stacked up. And I remember sitting back, similar to you in our work together, I remember sitting back and going, what's going on? Like, I have done so many other things, and all of a sudden this is having profound results. Like there must be something a bit iffy about this, but no, there wasn't. I went and checked it out. I went and did all the research. I went and looked into it. I was like, oh, this practice has been around for actually a few decades. It's only just coming into the mainstream now. And that's when I decided to specialize in it. And now, like, I also combine it. We've done this a little bit, but combine it with somatic experiencing. And so there's also a practice that combines the two called somatic internal family systems therapy, which basically just adds in the fact that when you have an emotion or a feeling, it's usually stored in a certain part of your body. And so when I think about emotions, I'm talking about energy in motion. And so we talk about an emotion, we're talking about a certain energy that's stored in the body. And so as we start to do the parts work and we show up for that part, we can also show up for that part of our body. As we release that part from its duty and from its protection of us, we can also start to release physical ailments. And that's happened with me. So sometimes you'll have people that are burping a lot, farting a lot. I've had a few times where I've thrown up just from realizations and connecting to certain parts of me. Remember the first time I spoke to Mr. Nice Guy, I spent the next week and a half showing up and purging all this stuff that he'd been carrying. And I remember checking with my facilitators, asking, what's going on? And I was just like, well, he's just been holding on to this for so long. And there was just this disgust, this anger, and this frustration. And so it was a real process of discovery of, I guess, doing the work, discovering the work, and then upskilling and learning along the way as well.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing. That was a lot. There's a lot in that. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, I personally haven't yet like gotten past many of the chronic ailments that I have in my body. Like, I know it's there, and it's just something that I'm still a little bit concerned about getting into. But we've dipped our toes every now and again. But there's definitely something there, and you feel it. There was an experience that I had a little while ago, a number of years ago now, where I took myself to Lawn, which is, beautiful beachside town, and I got 5 grams of mushrooms or 4 grams of mushrooms, and I ate the mushrooms, and I was by myself in a hotel room for the day, and I did I felt, when I trip, I feel the need to move and do some yoga and stretch and kind of like let my body loose. So I felt like I had my yoga mat, I had everything prepped, and I started doing some yoga. And they say that your hips store a lot of emotion and a lot of like pain. And I've had tight hips for a long time, and they're starting to get much better. I've been working on them, but in that time, my hips were extremely tight. So I eventually got into a pigeon pose. And then from that pigeon pose, I ended up bawling my eyes out for half an hour. Like, just no reason. There was no thoughts coming in, just sad, just like crying. And then I heard this little voice, and by the end of half an hour, I'm like on the floor in this pose. Like, I've released so much. And then I just heard this little voice in my head that said, "Oh, you're good now. You don't need to cry anymore." I was like, all right, great. I went on and did something else. So there's definitely something in it. It is very challenging to get into. And I feel like a lot of the times you might need some support around it. You might need to have a good framework of how to tackle it, as opposed to just sending it. And because it's not easy to work on, the connection between the mind and the body, and then like moving the body and healing both parts at the same time. So the next question I had was, what value do you see on these courses, these in-person kind of courses, and how would somebody find appropriate courses and directions to go to immerse themselves into potentially working on healing outside of staying away from all the potential sharks and snake oil salesmen and all that other bullshit that you can find in these spaces?
Yeah, it's true. And just to add one last thing to your experience with the mushrooms and the emotion is, one, like, we don't need a reason, which I know you know, but just to like caveat that, we don't need a reason. It's just an emotion. It's just energy. And so you can just feel it, and then that part of you is like, yeah, you're good now. Sweet. And I sometimes will wake up just feeling something like, oh, just feel a bit icky. You need to feel this thing. And the number one thing you can do to get started outside of from what you did, which is great if you feel like you're up for that sort of experience and you've got the right support around you.
I would probably caveat that before we move on. My experience in psychedelics was slow. It was half a gram here with some friends. It was a gram here in a good setting. It was, a lot of therapy. It was a lot of meditation. It was a lot of reading books that, allowed me to get in a headspace where I could go on a big dose and a big journey alone without fear, because I knew that I had the tools to address whatever came up, good, bad, ugly, evil, whatever. So I wouldn't suggest to anybody listening to this, go and send it, get 4 grams of mushrooms, put yourself in a room and see what happens. I mean, it's great, but you need to train to build up to that point in time. So anyway, that was my little caveat. Continue.
Yeah, and I think that's good to add, because there's not always background given to those stories, and like the truth is you built up to that amount, and that's really important. And the other thing I was going to say was, for a lot of people, when they're feeling an emotion, they'll often resist it, and they'll try and not let it through. And like, that's probably one of the worst things you can do. It's not to say that there's nothing wrong with you for doing that, because that's a totally normal human reaction to resist feeling uncomfortable. But the best thing you can do is just let go. just let go and just let it move. And I always come back to this. My favorite kids book when I was growing up was We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And, you know, there's this saying in there, which is, we can't go over it, we can't go under it, we can't go around it, we're going to have to go through it. And that's the metaphor that I use for feeling our emotions. There's no way around it. There's no thinking your way through it. You just got to feel it. So yeah, just wanted to add that bit as well.
Yeah, for sure. There you go.
I was just going to answer the other question. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. In terms of if people want to engage in parts work, I mean, they can definitely come and approach me at Another Way. We're starting to run more and more courses to connect people to this modality. We've got a retreat coming up in October, which will be out by the time this comes out, which will be just for men and providing a space for men to do the deeper work in a group. And then also, you know, you can look up, there's a few books I'd really recommend. The founder of Parts Work IFS is Richard Swartz, and he's written some great books that introduces you to the parts work. No Bad Parts is his introduction book. And the IFS Institute is great in terms of training and in terms of connecting with other practitioners. But also if people are interested in working with a therapist and maybe they don't want to work with me, or they want a female therapist, or, you know, they just want some more information, they're so welcome to message me on Instagram or to drop me an email or anything like that as well. Because yeah, there can be some, you know, I think referral networks are really valuable in this sort of space. So I'm happy to refer them to the right person.
Yeah, great. And what, on the note of IFS generally, kind of, it seems like a little bit of a dark art and it's getting some traction, but there's a lot of resistance in the general psychological world. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but anyway, you get what I mean. So what are some misconceptions there? And, you know, from your experience, what have you seen and how would you address those misconceptions?
I mean, the first thing I'll say is we're at a really interesting time in the psychology field. Don't worry, I'm not going to geek out on you too much, but very much the psychology field in the Western world is very much a reflection of World War II practice and World War II research, and a lot of what came out of, you know, that period of time in the world. And a lot of the approach back then for psychology, and as it evolved over the decades, was very much the therapeutic model was, yes, the therapeutic alliance, but also more around talk therapy as we talk about it. You know, let's talk about the things and we'll work over it. A lot of the research that was done post-war. And then a lot of the practices that were formulated were to support people that were recovering from the war. What we're seeing now is we're at an interesting point with psychology where we've got a lot of traditional practices that are very much based around the talking therapy. And then we've got a lot more of now these somatic practices which are based around healing the body. And there's a bit of a divide, at least what I'm noticing, between those two different camps. And then there are people that are combining them. And then, you know, people are adapting and growing and evolving. So this is like obviously like very broad statements around it. But I think just to speak to IFS in this work, what we're seeing, and The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk sums this up really well. We're seeing that as the body holds trauma and we heal the trauma through the body, we're able to release energy out of the body. We're able to heal the body in profound ways. And maybe this is a bit of an out there statement, but in many ways, the faster that you're healing, the faster you don't need a therapist. And so that can also threaten some therapists if they feel like they want their clients to hang around for a long time. Personally, I would love for my clients to heal themselves and for us to work together, and they're in and out of working as quickly, you know, and they're off helping the next person.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's happening. And, you know, as with any industry where there's change and there's rapid change, I think it's taking time. And there being really good research is really important. And the research is building and growing around IFS. The one thing I come back to, and I would suggest that anyone that's listening comes back to, is engage with it in your own way, engage with it, practice it, and then see if it works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, then maybe it's not the practice. It's not the only solution. It's just, I think, a really emerging and exciting one and effective.
You made an interesting point about the incentives. And for people listening, and this is not necessarily specific to a therapist or the psychology field, but even health in general, especially in America, it's really, really stark to see the difference between American and Australian incentives in health. What's his name? I've gone blank. Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger has a very, very important line about this where he says, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. So when you're working with people, or when you're thinking about working with people, or when you're framing out your life, look at the incentive structures that people have, and then you're more than likely, in many cases, more often than not, unless you find someone who is just truly altruistic, but even then, most people have their incentives that are going to drive them to action. So look at the incentives before you make the decisions, before you kind of bring someone in, especially in the therapy components, or in your as a doctor, etc. It's really, really important, and maybe we are moving into a different direction now because of what you said, and it becoming very clear that it isn't working, and people are fed up and want to find different ways to work through this stuff because it's becoming clearly a very big epidemic.
Yeah, I mean, big topic, right? But I think just to cast my net across it briefly, I agree with the incentive structure piece. I think what we're seeing in the therapeutic space is right now, especially in Australia and even in America, having been there a bit last year and connected with people, demand is far outweighing supply. And the supply model of trained psychologists, as an example, is not really working anymore. We can't keep up with demand. And so we're needing more psychologists, but it takes long to train them. And so we're having to look at other models of how we do this. And one of the hypotheses that I'm working with at the moment is that I think people come to therapy because they're having challenges in their life, and they're having challenges with their mental health, and maybe they're having challenges just navigating big life circumstances. And our traditional model in the West is that you go and see a therapist, or you go and see a counselor or a psychologist, and that's how you solve your problems, and you do it in an isolated room. Now, I saw this at the Man Cave, where I worked for 5 years. I see this now in Another Way programs that I run. One of the number one things people say at the end of the program or the end of the day is, I don't feel like I'm alone anymore. I feel like there are other people going through the same challenges I'm going through. That in itself is such a big part of the healing process for people. I'm not alone. And so I think what we need to look at going forwards is not how do we create more group programs, because that's not suitable for everyone. But one of the most effective group programs in the world is Alcoholics Anonymous. It has 12 clear steps. It has a community-based element. It has a group work-based element. And whether you like it or not, it's effective. It works. And so I think we need to look going forward at how do we challenge the model of therapy? How do we challenge the different incentives that are being structured? And how do we start to, look at it in terms of not just assuming that one-on-one therapeutic relationship is the best solution for someone, and start to explore other ways of creating programs that are going to support people.
So basically there's a potential scale issue right now with therapy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The demand is outweighing supply. And then, that's also being conflated or worsened by the fact that there are people are facing more and more, having more and more mental health challenges for different reasons. The world feels like a less safe place. When we were working with, this is just in Australia relevance, but I think it applies to, very much a lot of the world as well. But, the last 4 or 5 years in Australia was a really, really challenging time for a lot of people for various reasons, because of the lockdown laws and because of COVID. And so we're now seeing there is an exorbitant amount of people that have mental health problems and they need support working through it. But the system actually just can't keep up with the demand. There's a lag. So I think we need to find other ways of providing support to people. And the model that we've got at the moment is really breaking under pressure. And I feel like most evolution happens when you sort of run out of options and you got to do it. And I think that's where we're at with psychology.
What value do you see in AI as a tool for therapy?
I see it as potentially really valuable, to be honest with you. I can't speak into the details, but I do know of some people that are trying to develop an AI tool that supports people as a therapist and is able to respond in a reliable way in the way that you might need. And when you combine it with something like a practice like parts work, which does have some rules and principles, there are ways where you can create an AI that is able to show up as a therapist for someone. Obviously there are constraints to that, but I genuinely think that AI could have a really positive role to play.
Yeah, cool. It's very curious. I'm very curious about these frameworks of, using AI as tools and the way that once they're set up appropriately with the appropriate constraints, they are extremely valuable. In the past, I've had moments where I've gone to just ChatGPT and just chatted to it about an issue I've got, and it's even as crude. It has been effective sometimes. So it's definitely valuable.
Just quickly though, I want to talk to you about a taboo but very important topic: sperm health. I bet you didn't think I was going there. One day I want to have kids, and like any future parent, I want to give them the best shot at a healthy life. But let's face it, we're at a war every day with our health in this modern world. Chemicals, microplastics, and artificial environments are wreaking havoc on our internal systems at every turn. And if you know me, you know I'm obsessed with health, and the health of my swimmers have been on my mind for a number of years. That's why we've partnered with Legacy, who are changing the game in at-home sperm testing and freezing in the US. Did you know that globally, sperm counts have dropped by 50% in the last 40 years? Let that sink in for one moment. This is not just a fertility problem as well, because low sperm quality has been linked to a high risk of testicular cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and even early death. And on top of that, your sperm quality begins to decline around age 30, and by your 40s, the risk of infertility and having a chance of a child with neurological disorder begins to go up. So testing and freezing now may be the best decision I make for my future family, and potentially you too. So Legacy makes it easy. They send a kit straight to your door. You do the business in the comfort of your own home, and in 48 hours, the results are on your phone. Plus, you can freeze your sample at 2 secure locations for peace of mind. So if you're like me and you want to be proactive with your future, as well as support the podcast, head over to givelegacy.com and use the code TOT at checkout for 10% off. That's givelegacy.com using the code TOT for 10% off. Thanks for listening. Now back to the podcast.
And on that note, I'd love to potentially do an actual session with you. So let's jump into, a guided IFS, like a light version of what you would do in an actual setting. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, dude. And thanks for being open to trying this. I mean, just for everyone listening, we're just going to do a couple minutes just to give people a taste of what it is. And it's good. So let's just start by slowing down. And as you're slowing down, can you just tell me just an emotion or a feeling that you've been experiencing the last couple of days or last week?
Currently right this moment, there's some anxiety in my stomach. It feels like, the feeling of anxiety in my stomach is kind of a stabbing, needly feeling, like a low, annoying, stabbing, needly feeling.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. So what I'd love you to do, just take a few breaths. And as you're breathing, just set the intention that you're not trying to get rid of the anxiety. And set the intention that you're also welcoming the anxiety into your body. You're not going to resist it. You're not going to fight it. You're not going to push it away. You're going to allow it in. And then when you feel ready, just acknowledging the anxiety out loud. So you can just say, "Hi, Mr. Anxiety, you're a part of me."
Hi, Mr. Anxiety, you're a part of me.
And let's just ask him, how are you feeling today?
How are you feeling today? So there's a stress. There's like a feeling of stress, an unclear, overwhelmed, too much to do. Stakes are very high. There's stress.
Okay, nice. So in this moment, and I know you know this, but I'm just going to say it for you and for the audience as well. I want you to see that your anxiety is actually here to try and help you, and he's worried about a few things. So let's just start by saying thank you for raising your concerns.
Thank you for raising your concerns.
What are you most stressed about?
What are you most stressed about? Just this need to, survive in the city without a clear plan, opening a lot of doors, not having focus, letting people down, letting myself down, potentially not being who I said I want to be before I got here, and getting caught up in the noise of the city, misalignments in my actions and intentions. Just a little bit messy, feeling very messy, and feeling very unstructured, and feeling very unclear as to how to get structured.
Okay, nice. So in this moment, what I want you to keep doing is coming back to your center, and then seeing and feeling that Mr. Anxiety is separate to you, and he's got this whole world that he's experiencing right now. And he's trying to get your attention through these stabbing pains in your stomach. And we're not going to resist it, but we are seeing that there's a separation between you and him. So if we were to imagine then that he's a part of you, and that he's actually looking for support, and he's trying to protect you and support you, let's start to ask him, how can I support you? So just ask him, how can I support you?
How can I support you? I mean, that's an easy one. It's not committing to things that you don't really want to do based on past patterns and past sunk costs. It's really hard, though. It's really hard to not do those things and fucking
He's like, but hang on, we've invested so much in all these different things, and now he wants to not do them. Like, is that what it feels like?
No, he wants me to not do it. He wants me to focus.
Oh, so
and
he
do
wants
less
you to
and be more intentional and stop fucking around. But also it's hard because there's ways to make a living. And it's all jumbled up into this one big mess.
Yeah. And awesome. And so again, what I want you to see is like this part of you is he cares so much about you being successful, and he cares so much about you making the most of this opportunity, and you guys are on the same team. So let's ask him now, how can we work together?
How can we work together? I'm getting he's saying we can't until you have to take the lead and you have to make the right decisions. As in me. He can only do so much, and he can only yell so loudly, and at some point it's exhausting, and it's up to me to stop going back to the old habits and patterns and figure out exactly, actually now that we're talking about it, figuring out exactly what you really genuinely do want, and stop making these excuses. And once you figure out what you want, doing it, and doing it with intention. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. And like, how amazing is it in this process, how much genuine, practical advice and direction that this part of you has for you? And what I love as well is that he's asking you to lead. And that's really what the parts of us want, is they want us to lead. They want our presence. They want us here. And what he's probably noticed is he hasn't felt your presence. So just take a moment now to connect back to your true presence, you being really fully here. and you don't have to answer this now, obviously, because it might take some time. But if you were to start to connect to why you are in New York, what are you really there for?
I mean, I do know that. It feels like this city can give me the most out of my life, and I'm learning a lot. So just to learn and grow and make the most out of the experiences that I have.
Amazing. And so if that's your guiding light, then that's the thing to come back to. And all you need to do is embody that and continue to refine it and to explore it. So let's start to close out the process. You can just ask Mr. Anxiety, is there any way that you can support him moving forwards?
Mr. Anxiety, is there any way I can support you moving forward? I mean, at the core of it, it's just figuring out what I actually want. Like really, truly what I want to be working on. You know, who I want to have in my life, in friends and relationships, really figuring that out, and then only doing those things, not doing half-hearted things because it's fun to, or maybe something cool can happen. Just there's not enough time in the day, and he's feeling overwhelmed by all the open loops that need to begin to close.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the hardest things about life, but especially when you're in a city like New York, is opportunity cost. There's so many different options and opportunities, and you have to choose which way to go. So it sounds like a pretty reasonable request. I mean, do you feel like you can commit to Mr. Anxiety to do that, to get focused and to get clarity on what you want?
Hopefully after summer. Yeah, damn.
But you can also come back to him, and what we can see is that all he actually wants is he wants you to choose yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you can also choose yourself over summer. It doesn't mean that you have to be doing work or being productive. It actually just means that you're getting clear on what success means for you and you're sticking to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all he wants.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you can at least make that commitment to him?
Finding it hard to. I'm finding the resistance, to be honest. Like it's a work in progress. I do know it's there, but it's a work in progress, and there's a lot more to it that I need to unpack.
Totally. And for the sake of time, like if we have more time, we'd go into, there's potentially another part of you here that's resisting this next bit as well. There's another part that's coming in. But for now, let's just really acknowledge Mr. Anxiety for being really honest. And if you can, just really say thank you to him and acknowledge him for being so open with you.
Thank you, Mr. Anxiety, for being so open with me and being there to support me.
And just ask him, is there anything that he would like as an acknowledgement? Is there like a gift that he wants or something just to acknowledge his work?
Is there anything you would like as an acknowledgement to the work you're doing? No, I said it's good. It's good. Figure it out.
He's like, just go and sort it out.
I don't need shit from you. Just get it done. Yeah. Don't add more to my plate.
I like this guy. He's good. Okay, so let's just close the process, and I just want you to say to him, just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for being here.
And then just feel that he's a part of your team, and that no matter what, you love him. No matter what he does or says, he's a part of you. You're not going to invest any more energy into trying to resist him. And you're also going to see that he has your best interests at heart. He's just been trying to get your attention.
Mr. Anxiety, I love you. And I can see that you're here to support. Well,
that's good. Okay. Well done. So just take maybe one last breath and just come back into your center and allow yourself to integrate that little experience, that process. And when you're ready, you can come back out.
No. 5 minutes. Bloody hell. Doesn't take long. It should just unravel into chaos.
Yeah. How are you feeling now?
Yeah, you know what? Like going back to the conversation around the technique and everything, like as a third party listening to what that was, there's probably some confusion as to what was going on internally. And the moment there was an acknowledgement of the existence of the part and the existence of the feeling the part gave me, there was a slight release of that feeling. And it happens so often. It's like the moment you're acknowledged, it's like the charge dissipates a tiny bit. And you can think about that with people in the external world. The moment you acknowledge their pain, or maybe the parts sort of, coming at you in whatever various ways, they tend to go, oh shit, wait, hold on, what? and it decharges slightly. So that was the first thing. So just pure acknowledgement. And then the second thing was, and we've worked together on this a bit, so there's a bit that's not being said. And, I've read the IFS book and we've done some work in this space. But what Matt was doing, or what you were doing, was prompting me to then speak internally to my parts as though they are third person. They're in third person. Like they are their own personal versions. You split it out. Like I am a human that is Adam here doing me. And then there's a part of me that in my mind is accessed through the physical emotion, but in my head, I'm visualizing an external person, like somebody else that I'm talking to and having a conversation with. So, and it sounds really weird and kind of woo-woo, but the point, what's happening internally is I'm asking this question and then I'm just waiting for an answer, waiting for something to come back from internally. So I'm having this internal dialogue, but I'm not talking about it. Like I'm not planning what I'm going to say next. I'm putting this prompt out into my subconscious and then waiting to see what comes back, if anything. And there's no judgment to what comes back, because that is whatever the truth is in that moment. And we can break it down and see whether it's it's fake, or it's a potential, like some bullshit from a part that wants to hide something else. And it's kind of a little bit like dynamic as you're going, you're just feeling it out. And that in itself takes some work and practice to get to, but that was what was going on internally. So I just kind of wanted to give some, a framework of understanding.
Yeah. Thanks, dude. I think that's useful. And yeah, I mean, like I've introduced, I always feel so grateful to be the person who gets to introduce people to IFS, but also gets to keep witnessing. And I never cease to be amazed and surprised by the creativity of our inner world and the different parts and how they show up and what they look like and what they like to call themselves. And, our parts are so funny. They've got this whole world of their own. And like, I genuinely was just like, oh, I'd love to hang out with Mr. Anxiety. Like, he seems like a chiller. He's talking truth to you, right? And like, what we would sometimes do as well, if we have more time, would go, okay, well, what does he look like? What's he wearing? Where is he at the moment? And then start to paint a picture of that part of you's world and like going into their world. And I think like one of the most important principles to take away from the parts work for anyone listening is you're not going into the parts work to fix yourself or to fix the part or to get rid of it. All we're doing as part of the parts work, fundamentally at the bottom of it, is we're bringing presence and acknowledgement to that part, and we're seeking to serve that part as best we can. And that's it. And our parts, just like any other person, can feel if you have an agenda. And so then you can also go talk to Mr. Agenda. Oh, hey, Mr. Agenda, it's you. And he's like, oh, I've got my clipboard. And I'm like, bro, we don't need the clipboard, but I'm thank you so much for being here. He's like, oh, that's okay. You just let me know if you need me. I'm like, I will. Okay, back to you, Mr. Anxiety. Like, you're allowed to have fun with it. And I guess I like to bring a lightness to it. And as you've experienced and as we've traversed together, there are times where it's actually you just need a good cry or whatever it is, and you let the emotion come. But I think there is a real healing side to this practice that brings lightness and play that is really beneficial.
Cool. That was a good way to I think wrap up that part of the podcast. So thank you for doing that, and I appreciate it a lot. I would love to jump into a couple of like general philosophical explorations and some life prompts. So my next question for you is, what's the biggest thing that you've changed your mind on over the last 2 years?
Oh, all right, shifting gears. Biggest thing I've changed my mind on. Honestly, responsible and conscious use of medicine, drugs, and things like MDMA, ketamine, mushrooms. I was against them for a long time, and they're one of the main catalysts and main reasons that I'm in the place that I am today. So, yeah, definitely changed my mind on that. That's a big one.
Yeah, it is a big one. Sam Harris has spoken about this at length, and he said that there's two things that he would want his children to do. It's experiencing MDMA in the appropriate setting and experiencing mushrooms in the appropriate setting. And I am inclined to agree. I think both of those things, from my personal experience as well, like MDMA has opened the doors to like deep love and connection with some of my close friends to a level that I could never have gotten to. Well, maybe I could have, but not understood that it existed for a long time. But it kind of just pried open the door and was like, hey, this is here. And you're like, look at that. How do I get there without being high? That's like the next thought. So same with mushrooms. It's a door. They've been used for thousands upon thousands of years in spiritual practices with shaman across the globe. So you've got, if you really dig into this, you've got medicine men and women in pretty much every single culture of the globe. It's crazy. And they all have a different version of a psychedelic. Like in the desert, it's, the cactus that can be boiled into a psychedelic. In the Amazon, it's ayahuasca. In fucking, I don't know, the Otways, it's mushrooms. It's all these.
Even in Australia, the Indigenous Australians had the acacia tree, which contains in it DMT just the same as ayahuasca does and is used in the same way. They just haven't shared their knowledge and their songlines with us because there's still a lot of healing work to do in Australia. But yeah, you're right. Every country, every Indigenous culture especially, has some form of plant medicine that is integrated into their culture and that they use to grow and evolve.
And the use of that, it comes through, you can see them in like the art and the paintings and the drawings and the storytelling. It's all very mystical, but with very, very specific, measurable, considered thoughts tied into them. So when you begin to uncover that, and then you also begin to uncover why there's a big narrative around drugs bad, you will die, which is a whole other thing in itself, like the war on drugs in America that then went out to the whole Western world and, criminalization instead of understanding what it was, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole other podcast in itself. When you begin to realize the threads and realize a lot of what you're hearing and seeing is programming, not necessarily fact, and then you explore the human history and the impact that a lot of these substances have had on the collective intelligence of humanity, you begin to lighten up. At the core of it, you begin to lighten up and become curious. So, yeah, I'd agree with Sam Harris on that. And again, abuse and use are very, very abuse and appropriate use are very different things. So I want to caveat that as well. All right. So what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you? Next question.
What's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me? Oh, you know what? This is a real throwback, but one of my ex-partners, she organized a surprise dinner for my birthday with one of my best mates and his partner at like a really nice Scotch and cocktail bar in Melbourne. And we both had no idea. The girls organized it. And I remember like just getting there and just being so genuinely surprised and then so excited because we were together for the night. But I don't know. I know it's a bit random, but it was really kind. I think because I think the way I give love is a lot of it is acts of service. And so when someone surprises me like that, it makes me feel really seen and grateful. So that's definitely one of the kindest things. Yeah, it was a fun night.
Nice. What lessons did you take from that?
From that night?
Or that act? That act.
Oh, from the act. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really basic rule. I feel like a lot of rules for life are really simple, but I think just thoughtful presence and surprises really make someone feel really seen and heard, and you know, the fact that it was aligned, it wasn't like something random. It was really aligned with what I love doing. One of the things I love doing, drinking scotch, hanging out with friends, and I just felt really seen. So I think I've gone on to organize some really thoughtful surprises for friends since then as well. I feel like that was the biggest thing. And to keep things fresh, you know, do some things that are spontaneous as well.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. That was very sweet. My birthday's in a month and a half. So if anyone's listening and wants to surprise me, it's probably actually come out on my birthday or close to. But anyway, moving on. If you could recommend only one book or a podcast or an experience for somebody to read/do that will have the most meaningful impact in their life, you could only do one thing or read one book, blah, blah, blah. You understand? What would it be?
Come to the next retreat that I'm running.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do a shameless plug, but it will be awesome. But I think I genuinely think life is our greatest teacher. And I think everyone should solo travel at some point. Doesn't matter whether it's to the town nearby where you book out your own Airbnb or wherever it is. I think solo travel is one of the most accessible, obviously to different extents, powerful things that anyone can do. And it becomes a mini rite of passage within itself because you're out in the big wide world. So I think if there was one thing I'd recommend, and probably I'm being, you know, biased by my current fact that I'm solo traveling.
Sure. That's okay.
I genuinely believe in the power of solo travel and the rite of passage you go on of just having to work it out when you're by yourself.
Cool. If you could know the absolute truth to one question, what would it be?
I mean, I feel like I know the answer, but it's still the question I'm compelled to keep asking and exploring, which is why am I here and why are we all here? And I think actually the one question is what does it mean to live a meaningful life? That's the bit that gets me every day. I'm like, what does it mean to live a meaningful life? I think I'm going to be asking that every single day until I die. And I feel like I already kind of know the answer, which is there actually is no answer. It's whatever you make of it. But I feel like that's the question I just would be happy to continue living into and knowing the truth too. I guess continuing to find new answers to that same question, I'd be compelled to explore.
Sure. So on that note, what are you excited about at the moment? Would you like to let the listeners in on anything what's happening in your world?
Oh man. Well, I mean, by the time you get this podcast, I probably will have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro again. I'm co-leading a retreat with Mountains and Marathons crew Shout out Jamin,
cool.
Jordan, and Jen, which is a rite of passage experience.
Jamin, John, and Jen.
Jamin, Jordan, and Jen. So we're co-leading a retreat climbing mountains and marathons, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. I'm pumped for that. That's getting me motivated to get fit. And yeah, with Another Way, we're launching our next retreat. It'll be in October, and I'm genuinely excited for it. It's called Catalyst, and the whole intention of it is to get people unstuck in their lives, but also get them unstuck in their bodies, and to help them start to reignite their passion, reignite their purpose. Why am I here? And get excited for life. I'm so excited by that because I get to see and witness the growth and transformation of people. And I think, personally speaking, I feel like I'm in a real build phase in my life. I'm reestablishing my health. I feel like I found a bit of a secret that I was trying to find for ages, which is my gut health. I read the book Letting Go by Richard Hawkins, and I just decided to let go of judgment and shame and guilt. And I didn't realize it was being held in my stomach. So I'm in the process of letting go around my stomach and seeing real results. And I keep asking myself the question, if there were no limits, what would I do? And who would I become? And so I'm trying to release a lot of limitations I put on myself to become an even bigger version of myself than I've ever been before. So I know it sounds really nerdy, and yes, I'm a personal development nerd, in a good way, which of course any personal development nerd would say. But yeah, I'm excited by uncovering new bits of the journey. Yeah.
Great. You need to have someone who loves to do this thing, to be an expert at it. So be a nerd. There's nothing wrong with being a nerd. Yeah. Thanks. Of course, man. Of course. Where can people find you if they're interested as well?
They can find me on Instagram at Matt Defina _ and also Another Way at anotherway.au _ or anotherway.au. And yeah, I'm active on Instagram. I'm active on online. So reach out to me via that way. And I'd be so happy to talk to anyone if anything's come up for someone, they want to chat to me, or if they're interested in working together. Yeah, drop me a message.
Great. Matt, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. It was a great conversation. I think there's a lot in this, and there's a lot of value for anyone who's made it this far. So yeah, appreciate you coming on and getting away from your, sangrias in the south of France for a little minute. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, dude. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed listening.
Of course. And anyone who's made it this far, if you could give the podcast a subscribe and a rating, it helps us a ton. Until next time.